Good day, beautiful people. This is Natalie Silva with Life Treasures and Golden Moments, sharing with you true stories of miracles and stories of inspiration. I have a beautiful story of inspiration today, and it was authored by Shirley and Terry Law, and the title of it is called Without Knowing Why. You know about love's dreams and dreams that come true. Well, this is such a story. I hope you enjoy it. This part is Shirley's story. The orange juice was already poured, the oatmeal nearly cooked, and I was stirring the scrambled eggs when the crazy thought popped into my mind: take the kids to breakfast at McDonald's. At first I ignored it. I've been warned by other young widows that your mind plays tricks on you, living alone and all. I hadn't really been alone since my husband's death in April of 1984, 6 months earlier, but the children were only 6 and 4. Go to McDonald's. The thought came more urgently, and for a second I wondered if I was cracking up. But surely the time for that would have been those 2.5 years of watching my tall, blonde, athletic young husband die inch by inch of a brain tumor. If grief hadn't been able to destroy my sanity, I thought mainly to keep my mind off this silly McDonald's notion, money worries might have. Jim had been a stockbroker here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, operating on commission, which did stop when he could no longer work. I'd found a job selling Visa and MasterCard service to Tulsa businesses. It kept me out in the car a lot, and I cried a lot there in the car. If I'd been going to fall apart, that would surely have been the time, with everything seemingly against us. Even the washing machine broke down, with no money to repair it. So that in the evening, after working and cooking and caring for Jim and mowing the lawn, I'd have to drive out to the laundromat. Without faith in God, I thought as I gave the eggs a final turn, I really might have gone crazy. I carried a Bible in the car. When I felt panic rise, I pull over and read and pray until I could go on. The oatmeal was ready too. In the living room, the kids were watching the Saturday morning cartoons. "Marie, Jason," I called, "wash your hands and come to the table." And still something inside my head, quite independent of my own thoughts, was insisting that we were to leave this good hot meal right where it was, get in the car, and drive a mile away to a fast food outlet. I never in my life had eaten breakfast at McDonald's. Where could such a notion be coming from? Where indeed? From the bathroom I heard Marie and Jason splashing water on the floor. I stood there at the stove, spatula in hand, thinking back to a chilly December day almost 2 years before, wondering if the nudging in my head now was in any way like the nudging that had come to me then. For a week I had been giving Jim and the children cold cereal because the stove, like the washing machine, had broken down, and Jim could no longer trust himself to try electrical repairs. We were 3 months behind on house payments, and as for Christmas, Santa just wasn't going to find our chimney. All that winter morning, I called on potential clients without success. As always, when a situation threatened to overwhelm me, I pulled the car to the side of the road, and there God spoke to me as clearly as though I'd used audible words. "Will you trust me? Will you trust me, Shirley, for Jim, for the children, and now and forever?" I wanted to, oh how I wanted to, but where could I get this kind of faith? Certainly I couldn't work it up on my own. "Father," I whispered, "give me that trust." At once a kind of peace seemed to enter the car, and into that peace dropped the names of 3 local restaurants. I called on all of them that afternoon and signed on 3 new accounts. From then on, these impressions came often, sometimes about work, sometimes about Jim's medication or about one of the children, until I learned to recognize them by a quality of loving urgency, very unlike my ordinary thinking process. This idea in my head now, if it had been anything except go to McDonald's, I would have said this was one of those times. But that was too ridiculous, wasn't it? Marie and Jason scrambled into their chairs, still in their pajamas. On this one morning of the week when we could loaf around the house, well, we could go to the drive-through window. Get your bathrobes on, I told them. We're going to bring breakfast home from McDonald's. Yay, shouted 4-year-old Jason. Can we get French fries? But Marie, 2 years older, looked from the waiting food to me. Her face was bewildered, as I felt. Not the drive-through. Go inside to eat. On second thought, I called as the kids headed for their rooms. Let's put our clothes on and eat there. Boy, I heard Marie tell her brother, does Mummy ever change her mind? 20 minutes later, I was steering through Tulsa's Saturday traffic, as baffled as ever as to why we were doing this. When Marie burst into tears, McDonald's makes me think of Daddy, she sobbed. Jason was too young to remember the days when Jim could still drive and used to take the two of them out, but he wasn't too young to understand sorrow. Oh, don't cry, Marie, he said. Why don't we pray about it, I interrupted. So we did, and then Marie said, God's going to give us a new daddy, and someone who loves God, added Jason. I said nothing, not out loud, but inwardly I was crying. Crying no one could ever replace Jim, not ever. It wasn't that I was mourning exactly. I'd done that during the years of seizures and pain. Death had come as such a release for Jim that I had to release him too. It was just that I wasn't ready to open up again to that kind of total involvement. Before he died, Jim had asked me to remarry. You're young, Shirley. You have your whole life ahead of you. Promise me you'll find someone else when I'm gone. But I don't want someone else, I protested inwardly as I pulled into the crowded McDonald's lot. As I'd feared on a Saturday morning, there were long lines at the counter. Thinking ruefully of the eggs back home in the skillet, I inched forward while the kids raced around the playground outside. At last I carried our trays to a window table. That's where we were sitting when they came in. A stocky, curly-haired man with a round, pleasant face, probably in his early 40s, and 3 children, ages maybe 12 to 5. I recognized the father at once, Terry Lawler, director of a singing group I'd seen at Oral Roberts' TV program. Certainly no one I knew personally, and yet the unmistakable impression came as I watched the 4 of them get into line at the counter. This is the reason you are here. These 4 people, this particular group of all the parents and children jamming the restaurant at this moment. I went on eating, but the food stuck in my throat. 2 years' experience in trusting God was insisting, introduce yourself. When I looked up, they were setting their trays down at the very next table. Lord, I objected silently. He doesn't know me. I can't just say hello. I'm Shirley. Then I remembered that a girl I'd known when I was growing up back in Portland, Oregon, had joined Terry Law's music group, Living Sound, several years ago. I could ask Mr. Law about Paula. He seemed sort of startled to have me speak to him. Paula had married a young man from Living Sound, he said, and together they were pastoring a church in Alaska. He was still looking at me oddly, probably wondering why I was butting in on the one day he had with his family. More details about his work were coming back to me. Living Sound traveled all over the world, especially behind the Iron Curtain, where young people turned out by the thousands to hear contemporary music with a Christian message. He must hate to have strangers break into his precious time at home. Just being polite, no doubt. He asked some questions, too. When I'd come to Tulsa from Portland, what the kids' names were, and what my husband did. Jim died last spring, I said. I'm a widow. Mr. Law sat down his coffee container so hard it slopped all over. He mopped it up quickly, said he was sorry about Jim, and wrote down my phone number to give to a lawyer he thought could be helpful. Then, with an apology, he turned back to the youngsters who were clamoring for his attention. What in the world, I wondered, as Marie and Jason and I went out to our car, had flustered him so, and what, for that matter, I thought as I cleared away the cold remains of our uneaten breakfast back at home. Had this whole strange episode of dashing out to McDonald's been all about? I just didn't know what it was all about. I wasn't really expecting God to tell me. I learned to trust Him these past 2 years, not to understand Him. The trusting is everything. It's peace and joy and security, long before the answers come. We see only a step at a time, so He can't usually tell us why, except that, in this case, He did. Now we switch to Terry's story. The conversation with Don Moen occurred on a Monday. Don was a music director of our organization, Living Sound. And as usual, he and I were abroad on an airplane. This particular September day in 1984, we were returning from Arizona to our base in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Our base. That's how I thought of Tulsa now. The place we traveled from. Not home. Not since my wife Jan died, even though our 3 beautiful kids were there, and my mother who'd come down from Canada to care for Misty and Scott and Rebecca. Across the aisle on the airplane, Don was watching me. It's 2 years this month, Terry, he said, as though reading my thoughts. 2 years since my world had changed, and as long as it takes for a car to leave the road and crash into a ditch. I'd been far away in England when it happened. No one ever knew what caused the accident. Perhaps the afternoon sun was directly in Jan's eyes on that east-west Oklahoma road. I only knew that my life seemed to have ended, along with hers. I plunged into bottomless despair, unable to pray or work or believe that I would ever do things again. It was in this mood that I went to see my friend and mentor, Oral Roberts. 3 months before I lost Jan, Oral had lost a son. How do you keep going, I asked him. I do it, he said, by praising God. Praise? When everything in me wanted to cry and curse? I didn't say, feel it. Oral said, it's simply a fact that God is very great. Tell Him so. As Earl predicted, praise was the road back into his life. Hollow and mechanical at first, it soon became genuine. Praise for Jan, for the 13 years we had been together, for her faith, for knowing for sure that she was right now with Jesus. Week by week, the praise got stronger, and so did my ability to do the things which at first had seemed impossible, to make plans, to travel, to minister to others around the world. Only the loneliness did not change. Praise helped me to live with the emptiness. It did not fill it. Friends asked, of course, if I would consider marrying again. I knew I should for the kids' sake, 11, 9, and 4, how much they needed a mother. I knew I should consider it for my mom's sake, too. No one could have stepped in more selfishly than she had. But she'd raised her family, and just as she should be taking it easy now. And yet, to consider marrying was just what I could not do. Every time I took my loneliness to God, He seemed to tell me 2 years. It was always the same. I was not even to let the subject enter my head before that time. And that's what I told these friends. Don was leaning across the narrow airplane aisle. 2 years, he repeated. Remember what you said. That I couldn't think about marrying for 2 years. I said that, and I haven't. Well, 2 years are up, Don persisted. You better start thinking. I leaned my head back on the seat, turning over my not very hopeful position. To me, my 3 children were the greatest in the world. But what woman would want to take on marriage and motherhood all at once? Where, for that matter, would I ever meet an unmarried woman my own age? There were plenty of single girls in Living Sound, but they were kids in their 20s. I was 41. I want someone I could talk to, someone who could understand the trauma that Misty and Scott and Rebecca had gone through. I kept waiting for Don to pick up a magazine or something, but from the other side of the aisle he was regarding me expectantly. She'd have to be a widow, I heard myself say, someone who had a good marriage as Jan, and I had, and knows what it is to lose the most important person in your life. Anyhow, I finished, embarrassed at this outburst. I don't know any widows. God does, Don said. Let's pray about it. I will, I promised him, trying to close off a subject I wasn't ready for. But Don had bowed his head. Father, you know Terry's need, and his children's need. We believe you have a plan already at work. I glanced self-consciously at the other passengers. Father, I joined in, keeping my voice as low as I could. There's a widow somewhere who... There's a widow in Tulsa, Don corrected. All right, in Tulsa. I ask that you, in your name and your own time, quickly. Okay, I ask that you quickly reveal. We prayed for several minutes, there on opposite sides of the aisle. I in generalities, Don in specifics. At the close, he stuck out his hand. With another nervous glance around, I reached across and gripped it. Thank you, Father, he pronounced. That is done. Just like that, prayer, in Don's view, didn't have to be long or eloquent, just concrete and totally trusting. At the office in Tulsa, a number of crises were waiting for us. Living Sound had teams on the road, both in the United States and Europe, including several Iron Curtain countries, and the week was hectic. Crisis, or no, however, Saturdays belonged to the family. This was the morning when I was in town that I took the kids out to breakfast, and the outing always started with a debate. Grandy's, I suggested as we piled into the car. Name me the place that made the pancakes I liked. Denny's, 13-year-old Misty voted. McDonald's, said 6-year-old Rebecca. You just like the slide, Scott scoffed, with the sophistication of one who has just turned 11. I say Denny's. Denny's wins, cried Misty. Now wait a minute, you two, I said. Rebecca hasn't gotten to choose for weeks. Let her decide today. And that was how, a few minutes later, the 4 of us went and were standing in the line at McDonald's counter. And I was gazing across the room at one of those most beautiful women I had ever seen. Not a brunette beauty like Jan. This girl had hair the color of sunlight. In fact, where she sat at the window with 2 little tow-headed kids, the sun streaming through her long blonde curls seemed to light up a room. Maybe it was because I hadn't thought about marriage at all for 2 years, but I felt a stab of envy for her husband. I was thinking that it would be great just to sit near someone that pretty, when as we left the counter with our trays, the table next to her opened up. I was trying to decide how to strike up a conversation when, to my surprise, she did it for me. Aren't you Terry Law? A friend of hers, it turned out, had sung for us for a while with Living Sound. We talked about her friend and then about anything I could think of. I found out that her kids were named Marie and Jason. Their mother's voice was as nice to listen to as her face was to look at. I peeled the lid from my coffee container as I thought of more questions like, what does your husband do? When the girl with the golden hair said, I'm a widow, I took a swallow that scalded my throat all the way down. What else I said to her I can't remember, except that I managed to get her phone number with some excuse about a lawyer. All I could hear was Don Moen's prayer on the airplane only 5 days earlier. All I could think of was, O Lord, my God, you are very great. And this is the editor's note. Shirley and Terry were married in January of 1985, 5 months after the chance meeting at McDonald's. A sixth child, Lorianne Law, was born in March of 1986, but she's not ours any more than all of the rest. What a wonderful story and a beautiful ending, a miracle of sorts. I hope you enjoyed our story today. This is Natalie Silver with Life Treasures and Golden Moments. Take care. Until next time, may you have a blessed week, and may God bless.